We begin with a Fox News alert. A gunman shot and killed 5 people and wounded at least 8 others at the Fort Lauderdale airport today. Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. We begin our show with a Fox National correspondent, Phil Keating, who is live on the scene in Florida. Phil?
Tucker, the scene here remains on lockdown as law enforcement, the Broward County Sheriff's Department leading it, going through the garages, checking every single vehicle, as well as every square inch of the airport property. That includes all 4 terminals, as well as the airfields and tarmacs. There have been helicopters with spotlights tonight flying over the runways, making sure there is nothing suspicious out there. Essentially, they're making sure this airport is entirely 100% safe and secure before they resume airport operations, which may not now happen, I am hearing, until possibly tomorrow. No one is allowed to enter the airport property by car. No one is allowed to leave the airport property, which means there are hundreds and hundreds of people out on the curb outside of Terminal 1, which was evacuated around 2 o'clock this afternoon, 5 hours ago. And there's a bunch of people inside Terminal 2 who had made it through security prior to the 1 o'clock shooting and were at the gate areas waiting for their planes to pull up and then get on the jetways and fly off to their destinations. They have not been allowed to leave. So for most of the people, or everyone outside, they have had no access to bathrooms or food for 5 hours. And I have seen some paramedics taking stretchers inside Terminal 2 behind me, probably to deal with some sort of medical situations regarding some of these passengers. Now, the deck below me here at Terminal 2 is where the baggage claim area is, and around 1 o'clock, that is when about 4 minutes of carnage were unleashed, when witnesses say the named shooter suspect in this case, Esteban Santiago, went to baggage claim, got his luggage, and then went into the bathroom, took his gun out of the luggage, out of the lockbox, which he had packed and checked in Anchorage, Alaska, to fly via Minneapolis to Fort Lauderdale, then loaded the gun, and then went out into the baggage claim area and started shooting people in the head. 13 people shot, blood everywhere, 5 people dead, and 8 people wounded and currently being treated at Broward County hospitals. Then it seemed that the airport kind of was starting to settle down. But then 45 minutes later, it was absolute panic and terror again, as there were reports of gunshots in the garage, SWAT teams running in there heavily armed, and then there were people running out of Terminal 1 onto the tarmac, across the runways with their luggage, running as far away from the airport property as possible because there were other reports that people had heard gunshots in Terminal 1. The sheriff says none of that was actually gunfire. There was only one shooting incident today, and that was at 1 o'clock. According to witnesses, it lasted about 4 minutes. 13 people shot, 8 wounded, 5 brutally murdered, and the law enforcement that responded fired no weapons. They ordered the gunman down to the ground. He surrendered, was handcuffed, and has been in custody since shortly after 1 o'clock. The latest on his personal background, his brother and mother tell the New York Daily News he has been being treated for mental health issues recently, and law enforcement sources are telling Fox News that in November of last year, so 2 months ago, he went into the Anchorage, Alaska FBI field office telling them that U.S. intelligence was planting thoughts of ISIS in his brain. They checked him out, put him on their list. They said they found no connection to terror, but it was an absolutely terrorizing 2 hours for all of the hundreds and thousands of travelers here today. Tucker.
Phil, thanks a lot for that. What a sad story. We get out of the State Department. We're joined by Fox News national security correspondent Jennifer Griffin, who has more on the gunman tonight. Jennifer?
Well, Tucker, I just got off the phone with law enforcement sources here in Washington who tell me that the gunman, Private First Class Esteban Santiago, was in fact investigated on multiple occasions by not only the FBI but also the Army CID. That's the Criminal Investigative Division. We know that he served in Alaska in an Alaska Army National Guard unit. We've spoken to a spokesman out there who confirms that he did separate back last year in August of 2016. He did serve one tour in in Iraq. That was from 2010 to 2011, February 2011. I would note that that was not a very active time for the military in Iraq. That was just before they pulled out at the end of that year. He was a combat engineer. He was separated from the National Guard, from the Alaska National Guard for poor performance, we're told by the spokesman out in Alaska. He joined the National Guard, the Puerto Rican National Guard, in 2007, and that is who he deployed with to Iraq. His family has told reporters that he did suffer from some mental problems after returning from Iraq. And what we do know, and Matt Dean, our producer at the Justice Department, has talked to law enforcement sources who do confirm that, in fact, in November, he did go into an FBI field office in Anchorage, not far from where he was living, and that he did say that he was having he believed that U.S. intelligence had infiltrated his mind, trying to convince him to join ISIS and forcing him to watch ISIS videos, as Phil Keating just reported. At that moment, law enforcement, FBI turned him over to law enforcement, and law enforcement then had him taken to be mentally checked out at a hospital. And at that point, the FBI and DHS, Department of Homeland Security, opened an interagency review. They looked into his background. They began talking to his family members, but they did not find any connection to foreign terrorists overseas at that time. Back to you, Tucker.
Jennifer Griffin, thanks a lot for that. Well, Congress confirmed Donald Trump's presidential victory today by accepting his 304 electoral votes. It's official. But that hasn't stopped a group of more than 170 Democrats in the Congress from trying to set up a taxpayer-funded commission to investigate Russian meddling in the election. The Protecting Our Democracy Act, or POTA, would give a 12-member committee a full 18 months to look into the matter. One of the leaders of this effort, California Representative Eric Swalwell, joins us now. Congressman, thanks a lot for coming on.
Thanks, Tucker, for having me back.
Well, we last talked to you last month, and you made the case for this commission, and your point was, look, there's a lot we don't know. But now there's a lot we do know with the delivery today of this report. Why would we need your commission?
Sure. Today, the public report that the White House put out with our intelligence communities made it clearer than ever that Russia attacked our democracy. It was ordered by Vladimir Putin, and they intend, and other countries likely would like to attack us again. And so I think we owe it to the American people, and my colleagues in Congress have joined me in this effort, to say, let's find out in an independent way what happened, why were we so vulnerable, and then make recommendations to make sure it never happens again.
So we learned today, or the report said, in any case, that the Russians intended to harm Hillary Clinton, and they believed that she was going to become president, and they were gathering information that might be used against her should she win. So given that, and I assume you accept that finding, shouldn't we find out now if they penetrated her server, which it strikes me was maybe the least protected piece of electronic equipment in the United States, and presumably that would be the first step if you were trying to gather information on her. You'd go to that server. It was not mentioned in the report. I haven't heard any Democrats mention that. If you get this panel, will she be subpoenaed on that question?
The goal of the panel, it's a bipartisan effort, because I believe Republicans and Democrats want to get to the bottom of the truth. And this is about making sure our elections belong to us. So the committee should have a wide scope in looking at what Russia did to try and undermine and influence our elections. So I'm not going to prejudge the results, Tucker.
Okay, but you say, well, I mean, two obvious points. You say it's bipartisan. Have Republicans signed on to this?
Well, I'm continuing to reach out to Republicans because I don't want this to be seen as trying to... Well, no, the commission would be bipartisan appointed. It would be Republican and Democratic appointed. I still believe that Republicans accept that we were hacked. John McCain held a hearing yesterday accepting that. But I would like to take this out of Congress, depoliticize it, and have members fully devote themselves to finding out once and for all what happened. Because after all, Tucker, the president-elect doesn't even accept that Russia hacked our elections. And so that reinforces the need to have an independent commission.
Can I stop you there? And I thought this when we talked before. There's something very disingenuous about you continuing to say you want to take this out of the political world. It's not partisan, when your statements have been entirely partisan. I'm going to read one of them to you right now. With the Russia-friendly president-elect taking office January 20th, you said, it's imperative we make sure our citizens are well-informed and our defenses are strong. So the implication is that somehow he's in league with Putin, or our defenses will be weaker if he is president because he is, quote, pro-Russian. I mean, that's an entirely partisan thing to say because, of course, Obama was president while this hacking occurred.
You should read his Twitter feed. Yeah, I know you're very busy, but if you read his Twitter feed,
I get it. You're entitled to your views, but it's not honest of you to say they're not partisan or there's no political agenda, because of course there is, and it's apparent in what you say.
Well, it's apparent in what Donald Trump says, which is that he admires Vladimir Putin, and so
but what does it have to do with any
disturbing.
of this? Do you think he abetted? I mean, okay, yeah, sure, he said nice things about Putin. I'm not here to defend it. I don't like Putin personally, but what does that have to do with the penetration of John Podesta's server and his email account? Do you think that Trump was somehow involved? What do his views on Russia have to do with this story? That's what confuses me.
Yeah. We are less safe as a country because we have a president-elect who does not believe in evidence. And so the American people are seeing our intelligence community undermined by the president-elect. So I think if you have something taken out of Congress and you have bipartisan experts look at that, hopefully, once and for all, we can sign off on what happened and move on.
Okay. So you said that part of, and you just said it again, that one of the purposes of this is to restore faith in our electoral system. And Americans are nervous about whether it's on the level, and you want to reassure them that it is. If that's true, why have you suggested that our voting machines were hacked? And you said it right here. On December 7th, you said the hacking included, quote, the scanning of electoral systems in Arizona, Illinois, and Florida. You know for a fact that the Russians had, and no foreign government that we know of, had any effect on the voting machines themselves, and you're implying otherwise. Doesn't that shake faith?
No, Tucker, you should read the report that came out today. No vote tallies were changed, but 3 election systems were hacked. And, you know, that should concern us, that they intended to go into election systems. And I don't want to relitigate the results. Donald Trump is going to be the next president. But for us to be a safer country and secure our democracy, we need to know what happened and assure the American people in a bipartisan way that it won't happen again.
But you'll concede that Barack Obama was president when this occurred, right? So you're saying that Trump is somehow making our country more dangerous, but it was President Obama who presided over this and who presumably left our defenses open wide enough that the Russians could exploit them. You don't mention that. I wonder
Tucker,
why.
I wish we would have done more to stop Russia while they were doing this. And I support the sanctions that are being placed on Russia, and it's incumbent upon Donald Trump to make sure those sanctions stay in place. And I hope he does keep them in place.
So since you read the report, you must have seen this. I don't think this has even been reported, but it's my favorite part. It found that the Russian government had run a disinformation campaign against fracking because they're worried about the low cost of American natural gas, which would, of course, undercut Gazprom, the state gas company in Russia. So environmental groups in this country were taking their cues from Russian propaganda masters. Would they be subpoenaed too, do you think?
This commission would look at Russia's intentions to influence our election. And I don't support anything that Russia does. I'm like you, Tucker, on this one.
So, but, I mean, if Greenpeace comes out and says fracking is dangerous, don't you sort of wonder, well, maybe they got that from their Russian spy masters who are kind of controlling them? I mean, that's what the report says.
And if they got,
the Russians are trying to make us against fracking.
And if they got that from Russia, they should disavow it now.
All right. Fair enough. Congressman, great to see you.
Yeah, you too. Thanks, Tucker.
Donald Trump received a 90-minute intelligence briefing today on Russia's hacking efforts during the election. Afterward, Trump released a statement saying that the country had, quote, absolutely no effect on this election's outcome. For more on the report and what exactly it said, we're joined by our chief expert on that, our chief intelligence correspondent, Catherine Herridge. Hey, Catherine.
Okay, so it's 25 pages. It's unclassified. And I don't think I've ever read a document that's more strongly worded and very definite about its findings.
Yes.
And the findings are that this was ordered by Vladimir Putin. The goal was to damage Hillary Clinton. It was to reduce the likelihood she would be elected. And then over time, they developed a preference for Donald Trump. But they also say that their job is not to measure the impact on public opinion. That's something that they can't measure. But certainly the propaganda was a campaign on a level that they had not seen before. But what I would say is that you really have to take the document at face value, and you have to have a lot of faith in the underlying data, because if you're looking to this review for evidence, there's no evidence here because of exposing sources and exposing methods. So
is it unusual for a document like this to make claims this concrete about a foreign leader's motives?
Right. This is a great question, because I was really taken aback by this high confidence on so many of the conclusions. High confidence is like getting an A or A minus on a high school paper. It means there's high quality intelligence and there are multiple data points that they put together. So I've never really seen a document quite like this before. But I would also say I've never seen the intelligence community come out with something that really has the effect of creating a big paper trail that puts a lot of separation between the president-elect and the leader of a foreign country just about 10 days before the new president comes into office.
Well, you'd hate to think there are policy goals behind something like this, but because I implicitly believe everything the government says, I'm not going to ask that question.
The reason I mention this is that the guidance I had very early on, sort of end of November when this really kind of came to a boil, is that there really was a concerted effort to create a big division between the president-elect and the Russian president, and then also to satisfy what's a lot of internal anger in the Democratic Party because the president did not act. The bottom line is that we can't see the underlying data, but the vice president-elect spoke to reporters within the last hour, and he's seen the classified information, and he says they're going to take action almost immediately when they come into office. So that says to me that they felt satisfied by what they read, but it's, you know, it's more complex than just that 25 pages that you can read publicly.
It always is.
Yeah.
Catherine Harris, thanks a lot for your perspective. Well, the Washington Post has spent months howling about fake news rigging the U.S. election. Now the Post has been caught publishing its own fake news once again. D.C.'s paper of record published a bogus story last week saying Russia hacked the U.S. electrical grid. The story was totally discredited, but not before it spread across the globe. Investigative journalist Glenn Greenwald has been spanking the Post like the bad little paper it is. Mr. Greenwald joins us from Rio de Janeiro tonight. Glenn, thanks a lot for coming on. So what exactly did the Post write that was untrue?
Essentially, the entire article from start to finish. They had this big blockbuster announcement on Friday, which was obviously sensationalistic and would have a huge impact if it were true, that Russia and Vladimir Putin had actually invaded the U.S. electric grid by placing malware within the utility system in Vermont. They induced the governor of Vermont and a Senator, Pat Leahy, to make these really bombastic statements about how this thug Vladimir Putin was trying to steal the heat to make Vermonters suffer during the winter. It turned out that the malware that was found was actually on a single laptop, totally unconnected to the grid. Then it turned out that the Russians actually had nothing to do with this malware, and then it turned out that what was on the laptop probably wasn't malware at all. So the story just collapsed one step after the next in the grandest humiliation possible.
Boy, that's really embarrassing. I bet they must have ran a front-page correction, and the editor, Marty Barron, must have gone on TV to apologize. Is that what happened?
Well, the amazing thing is, if this were just a one-time case, you know, you could say, well, sometimes media outlets make mistakes. But this is the second huge debacle that they've had in the last 6 weeks. Just 6 weeks ago, they ran this huge story that Russia, through this fake news operation, had exposed 200 million people to Russian propaganda. A huge story that went everywhere. As it turned out, it was based on a list compiled by a secret group, a new group, that was accomplished only by putting huge sites, mainstream sites like the Drudge Report, and various Clinton-critical sites on the left, labeling them Russian propaganda outlets. The story collapsed after 2 weeks. There's a huge editor's note at the top of the story. Marty Barron, the head of the paper, when the story came out, announced it, unveiled it on Twitter, made a huge deal out of it. When the story collapsed and they had to discount their own source, he said nothing, the paper said nothing, so the story went everywhere. The retraction was heard by a tiny fraction of the people, and we've seen this over and over throughout the last year when it comes to Russia reporting.
Interesting. And you've also seen anybody who raises questions about it denounced as a tool of the Kremlin. Now, just to be clear for our viewers who don't know your background or mine, we have very different politics and have for our adult lives. But I'm interested in talking to you because I think you're totally honest, and I don't think you have any other motives. You're not taking money from the government of Vladimir Putin, correct?
Notwithstanding the fact that I've been accused by that of people like Howard Dean, the former head of the DNC, that is absolutely correct. I am not. And in fact, you know, you just heard the report that came out today was just another set of repackaged conclusions from the Intelligence Committee, which may or may not be true, that, again, were completely unaccompanied by evidence. And when you simply point that out, that the intelligence community keeps just repeating itself over and over, its assertions, without providing evidence that can be evaluated whether or not it's true, that subjects you to claims that you must love Vladimir Putin, that you're probably working for the Kremlin, when in fact it's just the basic kind of skepticism that all journalists should be exercising.
So is that what animates you? And you're not entirely alone. There are a couple other people on the traditional left who said, whoa, hold on a second. This is not straight reporting, and we ought to ask real questions before we accept the conclusions the government hands us. But tell me, are you interested in this story because you just think someone's not telling the truth, and as a journalist you need to find out why?
I mean, I think, a lot of us came of age. I started being a journalist and writing about politics in 2004, 2005, in the aftermath of the debacle of the Iraq War, where, people were discredited, like Judy Miller in the front page of the New York Times, because they were just believing whatever the government was telling them without verifying it or asking for evidence. And that led to this disastrous war that killed hundreds of thousands of people. And I thought the lesson from that, and there's lots of examples like that, that's just the most memorable one. I thought the example we were all supposed to learn from that was that we shouldn't accept government claims unless we see evidence it's true, particularly when the consequences are so grave. You have John McCain saying Russia has engaged in an act of war. Nancy Pelosi is accusing journalists of being accomplices of Russia who reported on this story, which is basically every media outlet in the country, including yours and mine. These are really serious charges. We should see evidence for that.
Exactly. That's my perspective precisely. Glenn Greenwald, it was really interesting. Thanks a lot for joining us.
Great to be with you, Tucker.
Thanks. Coming up, the Republican Party is hoping to repeal Obamacare as soon as President Trump is sworn in. That's what they've told you. But it might not happen thanks in part to Senator Rand Paul, who's also, paradoxically, an opponent of Obamacare. He joins us next to explain what exactly is going on. Senate Republicans have vowed that their first act under President Trump will be repealing Obamacare, but they've met a potential roadblock in Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky. Paul was the only Senate Republican to vote against the budget resolution being used to repeal Obamacare. He says it adds way too much to the national debt, and he's trying to get House Republicans on board with stopping it for that reason. Senator Paul joins us now. Senator, it's great to see you.
Great to be with you.
So I watched your career from the very beginning, and I certainly pay close attention to your presidential run, in which you said, my first act, or one of them, will be to repeal the abomination that is Obamacare. And now, irony of ironies, you appear to be preventing that.
Well, actually, not quite. As a physician, probably nobody is offended by or is against Obamacare more than myself. I've seen it up close. I've seen it firsthand. I'll do anything to get rid of it. However, I don't want to have to vote for a budget that never balances and a budget that adds $9.7 trillion in debt in order to get to it. What I've told my colleagues is, why don't we introduce a good budget, one that balances, and then repeal Obamacare? The way the rules of the Senate and the Congress are, you cannot repeal it until you pass a budget. But why does it have to be a bad budget? We're not getting any Democrats to vote for the budget. This isn't a compromise with Democrats. We're going to vote for a budget. This is a Republican product. Why should it not be a vision of a conservative budget, of fiscal conservatism? Why should it be a budget that adds so much debt?
I think it's a fair question. You also said, though, that we should, and I'm quoting you, we should repeal Obamacare, but partial repeal will only accelerate the current chaos and may eventually lead to calls for a taxpayer bailout of insurance companies. You wrote that. I understand that reasoning, too. My question, though, is that Republicans have promised, if they were ever to achieve power, both chambers and the presidency, to repeal Obamacare right away. Why hadn't they thought this through?
Good question. Here's my point. The same time we vote for repeal, and I will vote for repeal, we should vote for replacement on the same day.
Okay.
There are many ideas about how we would replace this. We should expand health savings accounts so people can save to buy insurance. We should let them buy anything in the health savings accounts. We should let them pay for their insurance premiums in their health savings account. You should be able to pay for a diet plan. You should be able to pay for an exercise plan. You should be able to pay for vitamins. You should be able to pay for a vast variety of things.
Well, I agree with that. I bet I agree with every idea you have on this. I just know I would.
So do most Republicans.
Then why haven't they come up with an alternative? They've been promising it for years.
The Speaker of the House said we're going to have a replacement plan within a year yesterday. Really? We've been waiting for 6 years. Do we not have our replacement plan in order?
What's the answer?
We do.
Why haven't they done this?
I don't know. I'm putting forward a replacement plan. I put a replacement plan together, and it will be next week. I will release a replacement plan. It'll involve expanding HSAs, buying across state lines, buying any kind of insurance that insurance companies want to sell, and it would also involve something very important, and that's involving expanding healthcare associations. These are, if you have a pest control business and you and your wife are the pest control business, you should not be in an insurance pool of two people. You should be allowed to associate with people across the country. If we do those things, the cost of insurance comes down and you get rid of the pre-existing conditions.
Again, I buy everything you just said, but Republicans have controlled the entire Congress for a while. You just got elected to your second term. You're hardly the most senior guy in the Senate. You have a leadership. They've been telling Republican voters for years they're going to do this. Why haven't they agreed on a replacement plan until now?
Here's the thing. There are 50 replacement bills out there that are in legislative language. I met with Congressman Tom Price, who's been appointed, to the cabinet. I'm supportive of him. I'm supportive of many of his ideas. Many of the reform ideas that are already in bill form are his. My point to him and to the leadership in the House is you have all these bills. Put together a replacement bill and vote on it on day one. But if you don't, the second we repeal it, we're going to be blamed for all of the unraveling of Obamacare. And mark my words, it's going to unravel and unravel even quicker, and we are going to be blamed for the bankruptcy of the insurance companies that may come as a result.
But also, I mean, and my last obvious question is, don't you think promises like this made by Republican candidates seeking office that they knew they could never really make good on are part of the reason that Republicans voted for Trump in the first place, because they didn't believe any Republicans who were already here in Washington?
Yeah, but I don't know that we can't make good on these promises. We could put a good budget forward, we could repeal Obamacare, and we could put forward replacement the same day. So I will do this. Next week I will release a bill that has replacement, and I will do everything possible, both publicly and privately, to make sure there's a vote on that bill. I can't guarantee there will be, but I'm telling everybody in my caucus, and I'm trying to tell the country, we need to have replacement the same day we repeal Obamacare.
Good luck. Senator Rand Paul, great to see you.
Thank you.
Up next, climate change may or may not be up for debate, but temperatures are definitely rising on campus. A Georgia Tech climatologist says she's quitting her job because she can't take the PC atmosphere anymore. It's antithetical to science. She joins us next. Well, a climate scientist at Georgia Tech is quitting because she can't take it anymore. Dr. Judith Curry doesn't deny the climate is changing, but she says universities have become so politicized on the topic, she can no longer handle what she calls the craziness of it all. Dr. Curry joins us now. Professor Curry, thanks for coming on tonight.
Tucker, it's a pleasure.
Well, thank you. It is for me. So you have written that part of the problem with climate science, not just at your school but at others, is that research money only goes to researchers pursuing certain lines of inquiry, and that they're all the same, and that prevents good science from happening. Am I mischaracterizing you?
Not really, but what you're seeing is there's this dominant theme of human-caused climate change, which is where all of the research and the focus is being directed, and there's far too little funding and effort going into understanding natural climate variability. That's my concern.
Right. So is that, for those of us who are non-experts, is that the key debate, not whether temperatures are changing, because of course they always have, but over what's causing that change? And is there a debate on that?
Exactly. No one debate. It's clearly warming, and it's been warming overall for several hundred years. The key question is how much of the recent warming, say for the last 50 years, has been caused by humans.
Right.
And my interpretation of the evidence is that we really can't tell, and I don't see a clear signal that it's being caused by humans predominantly.
So for your position, and I think I'm just quoting you what you said, we really can't tell. You're not sticking on a hard position either way, but you're sort of open-minded, it sounds like. Do you believe you were penalized for that view?
Oh, I've been vilified by some of my colleagues who are activists and don't like anybody challenging, their big story. So, I mean, I walk around with knives sticking out of my back.
Yeah.
And, in the university environment, I just felt like I was beating my head against the wall and not being effective.
What's so curious, I mean, I live in a similar world, but it's a political world where people disagree and they have strong beliefs and ideologies and they attack each other over them. But that's sort of the opposite of what I understood science to be, where you were led by inquiry and evidence to conclusions, right?
Oh, exactly. Universities should be places of unfettered research, freedom of investigation, honest and open debate, diverse perspectives, etc. And in certain fields, you know, that are politically relevant, you're definitely not seeing that.
But, I mean, this is one that has relevance for all of us, even though those of us who aren't in college or don't have kids in college. I mean, the research you're doing and that your colleagues, the ones you described as activists, are doing will inform public policy in a way that affects every person on the planet. So the stakes are really high, no?
The stakes are very high. Personally, I think I can have more of an impact outside of the university in the private sector, sort of free market, academic freedom.
Huh, academic. So let me ask you this. When you hear people who ask the question that you just asked, to what extent is climate change being driven by natural factors that have always existed, and to what extent by human activity? People who ask that question are derided as climate deniers. What's your response to that?
Well, my response is we really don't know. It's certainly humans are contributing something. We don't know how much. From the evidence that I've seen, I don't think it's the dominant cause. You know,
wait, but Dr. Curry,
mostly...
you're not listening to TV, because 98% of scientists globally believe one thing. So you must be in the 2%, right?
Ironically, the way the question is framed about the consensus that yes, it's warming, yes, humans contribute to it, I mean, everybody agrees with that, and I'm in the 98%. It's
yes.
When you get down to the details that there is genuine disagreement that is really glossed over in the media.
Interesting. We need to do a multi-part series on the show on this question. Just what do we know and what don't we know, as honestly as we can. And I hope you'll come back for that. Dr. Curry, thanks for joining us.
Okay, thank you.
Well, straight ahead, British Prime Minister Theresa May is set to visit the United States in just a few months. But will Donald Trump's affection for one of her political rivals cause a chill in their relations? That's next. Well, here's something new. A local news report about Amazon's spend-happy voice assistant, Alexa, has triggered, ironically, an even bigger shopping spree. Earlier this week, we told you about Alexa mistaking a 6-year-old girl's chatter for an actual order, going ahead and purchasing a $170 dollhouse and 4 pounds of cookies. Well, after airing a report of the mishap, one San Diego news station said viewers all over the area complained that their Echo devices tried to order dollhouses. Apparently, they really were listening to television. In the new world, you will have no choice but to obey Alexa, particularly when she wants you to buy products on Amazon. Not surprisingly. Time now for the Friend Zone. We bring one of our friends within the building here at Fox onto the show. And tonight, we're joined by someone we literally could not like more, Janice Dean, co-host of Fox and Friends.
Co-host of Fox and Friends? Who wrote that?
We just upgraded you. We can talk about it later. No, who is the weather genius? Janice Dean, the weather machine. And I've got a couple questions for you, but I got to start with the weather because what is going on?
That's what everybody's talking about. We have cold temperatures that have sunk as far south as the Gulf Coast and the southeast, and we have a raging snowstorm that is happening across the south. Look at the wind chills. This is what's dangerous here. We're talking about minus 20s, minus 30s, single digits, teens across the south. So the stage is set. We've got cold air in place and a storm system coming out of the Gulf, Tucker, that is bringing right now snow and ice to areas that don't typically see wintry weather. So people are freaked out, rightfully so, because a couple of years in Atlanta, Georgia, we had people on the highways for days that couldn't move. So they have taken precautions there. They know that we have a big deal, a big storm on the way. And the West, by the way, also getting pounded by rain and snow over the next couple of days. Really the most rain and snow that they have seen in some cases in years that could put a dent in the drought. So a good thing, but too much of a good thing could bring flash flooding and concerns across the West. But this is the big deal that's happening across the South as we speak. Ice and snow in areas like Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, the Carolinas. In some cases, Tucker, we could see more snow in the Carolinas than we have seen in New York City. all season. So this is a big deal, and people are taking precautions. The good thing is it's happening on a weekend. It's happening so people don't have to go to work. They don't have to pick up their kids, hopefully. They are just hunkered down because this is a big deal.
One of those years when anything can happen, including when it snows more in Charleston than Manhattan. So we worked together for a number of years. I feel like I know a lot about you, Janice Dean, and it's all good. But until our reporters returned with their forensic background report they did on you, I didn't know that you were a comedian professionally at one point.
No. I was never a comedian. Now, they have these things in New York and D.C. where you are the funniest reporter. You audition or you do the... There it is. They actually have videotape.
We have the tape.
Oh, my gosh. It was at the Comic Strip here in New York City, and I won first prize, Tucker, if you can believe it. I talked about
you were I didn't even know that. You're such a modest person. You didn't mention that. How did you prepare for this? I mean, how do you go from being on TV to being a winner of a stand-up comedy competition?
I have always loved comedians and what they do, and so I just wanted to give it a shot. I love making my kids laugh. You know, on Fox and Friends, I love to make the audience laugh as well. I thought, well, this is a big challenge. I will say it was one of the most rewarding things I've ever done because I was so nervous about this. And to stand up there and just be raw and, just try to make people laugh, I will say it really was the most challenging thing. But what I did was I took my experience. I talked about what I do as a weather person, the emails that I've gotten over the years. Like when I was pregnant, I remember one email saying, Janice Dean, when are you having that baby? Because you're blocking the state of Mississippi and I need to see my hometown. So these are things that actually happen. The weirdest places I've ever been asked about a forecast. The doctor's office, the bathroom, that kind of thing. And I had some fun with some coworkers as well. I think you have a clip of that.
Here we go.
I've been doing this for a long time. Been doing this for 10 years. And speaking of being on television and the hair and makeup thing, I mean, it takes a lot. It takes a village. Oh, no. You've got to get, the hair tease, the hair color, the highlights, the spray tan, the Botox, the makeup, the jewelry. And that's just Eric Bowling.
Okay. I'm so sorry, Eric Bowling.
I've seen Bowling in and out of makeup in under a minute, but that's fantastic.
Like that. I was going to say Geraldo. It was a toss-up between Geraldo and Eric Bowling. I love you, Eric Bowling. Please know I kid because I love. But anyway, it was a challenging thing, and to make people laugh. I mean, I understand the rush the performers get, comedians get.
Yeah.
But, working with comedians, they'll say one night you'll have a great routine, and then the next night you'll do the same routine, and you won't get any laughs. So, hats off to people who do that. I don't think I'll be doing it again, but I'm so glad I have the trophy in my office.
That is fantastic. I wish I'd been there. Janice Dean, peeling back layers of the onion, and it gets sweeter as you get closer to the core.
And listen,
Thank
by
you,
the way, congratulations to 9 o'clock.
Thank you.
I'm so proud of you.
I hope you'll stay up late enough to come on again.
Of course I will.
Thank you. All right, up next, we've got an update on the Fort Lauderdale airport shooting. We're getting new information on that. Details, so stay tuned. Well, this is a Fox News alert. The investigation into the mass shooting, that horrible shooting in Fort Lauderdale at the airport, is ongoing tonight. For more information, we're going to go to Fox News national correspondent Phil Keating, who is at the scene. Phil?
Tucker, the airport will remain closed throughout the rest of tonight. No more flights in or out until sometime tomorrow. TBD on exactly what hour of the morning that may be. But for thousands upon thousands of travelers, this has been one very trying day. The airport basically went on lockdown around 2 p.m. after a second wave of panic, which ended up not turning out to be related or actually additional shootings. The only shooting that wounded 8 people and killed 5 people happened at 1 o'clock roughly at the baggage claim area at Terminal 2 here at the Fort Lauderdale Hollywood Airport. This United jet behind me just taxied around and pulled up, and this is one of several large-bodied aircraft that had landed here at the airport when suddenly it was put on security lockdown. They could not get to a jetway. Nobody was allowed to leave the airport property. Nobody was allowed to gain access to the airport property. And this was all around 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So presumably there are a lot of people on that plane who have been stuck out on the tarmac for the past 6 hours because they couldn't get to a jetway and debark the plane. And here comes another one of these planes filled with passengers. They're miserable. The people that were inside the terminals that I just spoke with were all now finally being allowed to leave the airport now that, for the most part, the airport has been checked square inch after square inch for any further threats that did not materialize. So hundreds and hundreds of people are now leaving terminals 1, 3, and 4. And if you have a car in the garages, you're allowed to go get to the car and drive off the property. There's a lot of people who are returning from cruises, and, well, their plane got canceled. They're now being allowed to leave the airport. They're all sending people to the Port of Everglades, where you get on cruise ships, to their terminal to at least get some food and try to figure out where they're going to stay for the night and rebook their travel plans to return home. Absolutely miserable day, but not nearly as horrible for the families of these 13 shooting victims. Back to you, Tucker.
Thanks a lot, Phil. Appreciate the update. Well, coming up next, President Obama is against walls. You knew that. They're mean. They confine the human spirit. And yet he's decided to build a big, fat wall. Anyway, it's not on the Mexican border. It's in D.C. Because when D.C. sends its fence hoppers, they aren't sending their best. Details ahead. Time now for You Choose the News. Put you in the driver's seat. We ask you to tell us what stories we should be covering but haven't been. Tonight's winning submission comes from Lynn, who sent it to us on Twitter, who said she'd like to know more about the wall, President Obama's wall. Here's the story. After President Obama vacates the White House in about 2 weeks, he'll be moving to a rental home in D.C.'s upscale Kalorama neighborhood. It's a neighborhood of the people, very rich people. What are builders doing to prepare for his family's arrival there? Well, they're building a wall, of course. TMZ reports that the Obamas are making sure the home is up to snuff for the Secret Service by constructing a wall to help keep unwanted people, poor people, off the property. Walls may be mean, they may confine the human spirit, but he wants one around his house. Well, Monday, our segment News Abuse is back. Have you seen an egregious example of media bias or dumbness? Of course you have. A ludicrous headline or a TV segment? Send your evidence to @Tucker Carlson or email Tucker Carlson tonight at foxnews.com. That's about it for us tonight. Our last show at 7 o'clock. Next week, we're at 9. The show that is the sworn enemy of lying, pomposity, smugness, groupthink, and vainglory. Don't forget to DVR us. That counts for ratings, and we appreciate it. We'll see you next week. The great Bill O'Reilly up next. See you Monday.